A shy girl, just an intern, timidly corrected a typo for a man who seemed like any other ordinary employee. She had no idea that the one she so innocently pointed out the mistake to was actually the young CEO, quietly reshaping the entire company from within. Between them stretched a gulf of status and expectation, wide and seemingly unbridgeable. Yet sometimes, it is the smallest flicker of sincerity that can open the door to a life forever changed. Some treasures only reveal themselves when you are brave enough to believe in yourself. Could a small, honest gesture be enough to change the course of a life? The first day is always the hardest, especially when you feel like you don't belong anywhere. Julia clutched the strap of her bag, her palms slick with sweat. The elevator gleamed with blinding light, every surface polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the crisp, purposeful figures of the employees packed inside. At 24, with her slight frame and neatly tied brown hair, Julia stood small and out of place among the confident, busy strangers. When the elevator chimed at the 5th floor, marketing, Julia drew in a deep breath. It's just an internship, she told herself. No one's even going to notice me. She stepped out, clutching a small notebook to her chest like an invisible shield. The open plan office was bathed in natural light from tall windows, alive with the sounds of tapping keyboards, ringing phones, and the hum of low conversations. It was a dizzying, unfamiliar symphony. Julia hovered awkwardly, feeling as though even her hands and feet were in the way. A young HR woman pointed out an empty desk near the pantry. "You can sit here for now. We'll assign you to a team later." Julia mumbled a shy thank you, took her seat, and pretended to study the onboarding emails flashing across her screen. Lunch came quickly. Julia didn't know a soul. She took her lunchbox to the pantry, found the most secluded corner she could, and ate in silence, eyes glued to her phone screen. Around her, clusters of co-workers laughed, shared food, exchanged the easy intimacy of old friends. Julia felt like a small lost pebble caught in a rushing current. As she was packing up her lunch, a voice broke gently into her solitude. "Is this seat taken?" Julia looked up. A young man, maybe a little older than her, stood there, simple. White shirt, worn jeans, a laptop tucked under his arm. His face wasn't particularly striking, but his bright eyes and soft smile made Julia's heart stumble. No, it's not," she stammered. He nodded, murmured thanks, and settled in across from her, opening his laptop without fuss or noise. His presence was like a cool breeze in the heavy air. Julia stole glances. He was absorbed in his work, typing swiftly, pausing now and then to frown thoughtfully at the screen. His laptop was covered in stickers, books, creativity, technology, not the sterile, polished look most of the office favored. It was surprising, and somehow comforting. That night, Julia wrote in her journal, "First day. No one talked to me, except the guy at table 3, the only one who smiled." The next morning, Julia arrived early. She had barely settled into her seat when she saw him again, this time with a large coffee in hand. They shared a brief smile. Nothing more, but it was enough. Enough to make her feel just a little less invisible. All that week, Julia barely joined any group conversations. Everyone seemed too busy, already comfortably tucked into their own circles. But every day around lunchtime, the guy from table 3 showed up at the same corner of the pantry, sometimes working, sometimes scrolling through his phone, sometimes reading a book. One afternoon, as Julia struggled with a thick stack of onboarding documents, he glanced up and asked quietly, "Need a hand?" Julia looked at him, startled, and shook her head fiercely, cheeks burning. He smiled, kind and understanding. "Take your time. Everyone feels overwhelmed at first." A simple sentence, but to Julia it was like a lifeline thrown across a vast, lonely ocean. That night she wrote, "Someone sees me. Someone cares, even if just a little." Day by day, his steady, quiet presence became an invisible anchor for Julia. They still hadn't really talked, but he was there, and that mattered more than she could say. Sometimes Julia wondered, who was he? Just another employee, a freelancer, a visitor? But she never asked. All she knew was that when he smiled, the anxious, lonely weight inside her lifted. At the office, Julia remained the quiet intern, diligently working, taking careful notes, rarely speaking up. But in her journal, her private little world, there were more and more entries about the boy at table 3. Today he asked if I knew where an outlet was. I pointed without saying a word. He borrowed my pen. When he returned it, he said, "Thanks, your pen writes really well." I took the pen home after work. I was afraid he might need it again and not find it. These small, fragile moments were treasures to Julia. One late afternoon, she caught sight of him standing alone on the balcony, gazing out over the bustling city below. The breeze lifted his hair gently. Julia, hidden behind a window, snapped a photo, one she would keep tucked safely away, a secret sweetness all her own. She pasted the photo into a fresh page of her journal underneath a single line. "The one person who made me feel less alone." In those first lonely days, in a sea of strangers, it had only taken one quiet smile to stop Julia's heart. On Monday morning, the shared workspace hummed with the steady tap of keyboards and the low murmur of Zoom calls. In the far corner, the printer chugged noisily, spitting out fresh stacks of documents. Julia quietly slipped off her light jacket, hooked it over the back of her chair, and sat down at her desk near the pantry. Her desk was simple, just the company-issued laptop, a paper coffee cup gone cold, and a small notebook. She opened her inbox, her eyes skimming over the flood of new task reminders. A fresh wave of anxiety swelled in her chest. She still hadn't found her footing, and everything around her moved at a dizzying pace. Just then, out of the corner of her eye, she caught sight of someone heading toward the pantry, coffee cup and laptop in hand. It was him, the boy at table 3. He wore a plain grey hoodie, black jeans, and a pair of sneakers scuffed at the toes. No ID badge, no thick notebooks or planners like the others. He slid into the seat across from her, plugged in his laptop, and sipped his coffee as he powered it up. Julia tried to focus on her screen, but then, clink, the soft clatter of a pen hitting the floor broke her concentration. She ducked down to pick it up, and at the same time caught a glimpse of his worn-out sneakers across the aisle. "Are you okay?" he asked, tilting his head, his voice calm and easy, his eyes genuinely concerned. Julia flushed. She nodded quickly. I'm fine." A quick, quiet smile crossed his face, more a nod of understanding than anything showy. Julia turned back to her work, but her mind had already drifted somewhere else. These small chance encounters began to happen more often, and each time they did, the heavy air of the office seemed to lift just a little. One lunch hour, the cafeteria was packed. Julia, tray in hand, weaved awkwardly through the tables, searching for a place to sit. Just as she was about to give up and retreat to her desk, she heard his voice from the corner. "There's a seat here." Relief blooming across her chest, she smiled and slid into the chair across from him. They ate in silence at first. Julia focused on cutting her chicken sandwich, acutely aware of herself. The air was filled with the rich smells of fresh coffee and toasted bread, and somehow that ordinary mix made everything feel a little less overwhelming. After a while, he tapped the Kindle resting on the table beside him. "What are you reading?" Julia startled a little, but then quickly turned her book around so he could see the cover. "Start with Why" by Simon Sinek. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I read that one too. Why matters more than how, right?" Julia nodded, this time a little more comfortably. "Yeah, I think when you know why you started, it's easier to get through the hard parts." He smiled then, a real warm smile that reached his eyes. That's a good way to put it. A slow warmth unfurled inside Julia. It wasn't the compliment that touched her, but the way he listened, like he truly cared about her answer, in a place where most people barely looked up from their screens. From that day on, even though they didn't talk much, small habits formed between them. A nod when they crossed paths, a shared glance when it rained, the quiet offering of a free outlet when someone's laptop battery ran low. One afternoon, Julia forgot her charger. Panic flared when her computer flashed a low battery warning. Before she could even figure out what to do, he slid a spare cable across the table toward her. "I always keep an extra," he said, as if reading her mind. "Thank you," she murmured. Embarrassed but grateful. "No problem." "First internships are tough," he added, winking playfully. Julia laughed. A small, real laugh she hadn't heard from herself in days. Slowly, she realized she was beginning to look forward to lunch. Breaks. Not for the food, which was always the same bland sandwiches, salads, or instant ramen, but for him. The familiar sight of him bent over his laptop, adjusting his glasses, sipping his coffee, quietly threading his way through the crowded office without ever needing to draw attention. Each day, Julia added another line to her journal. "Today he laughed when I dropped my pen cap. He asked if I was getting used to work. I mumbled something, but he just smiled, like he understood anyway. Just being in the same room makes it easier." She knew it clearly now. She had begun to hope. Hope for a presence. Hope for a glance. Hope for a smile. Even the briefest flicker. And so it became a quiet habit. Whenever Julia stepped into the office, before she even realized it, her eyes would search for him, the boy at table 3. Each gentle hello from him was a small beam of sunlight breaking into Julia's folded quiet days. On Wednesday morning, the air in the office felt heavier than usual. A major marketing campaign deadline loomed, and everyone was hunched over their laptops, faces tight with concentration. Julia sat at her usual desk, eyes locked on the screen, but ears keenly picking up every weary sigh around her. While waiting for an HR confirmation email, she slipped out to the pantry to grab another coffee. Just as she stepped out, she caught sight of Leo, the boy from table 3, seated at his familiar spot, laptop open, deeply focused on editing a presentation. On the big screen at the pantry, mirrored from his laptop, his PowerPoint slides were on display, likely testing out transitions. Julia glanced instinctively, just a flick of her eyes. And there it was, bold across the top. Marketing Campaign Strategy, Q3 2025. She blinked. Campaign, missing a G. She knew it by heart. She'd once written an entire college thesis on marketing campaigns. Her heart began to pound. Hair typo, right there in the title of an important presentation. She froze, coffee cup in hand, mind spinning. What if I'm wrong? What if he gets annoyed? What if I look like a busybody? Leo was still absorbed in adjusting the slide. Animations, tapping and typing away. Julia stood there for nearly a full minute, wavering, until someone brushed past her, jostling her elbow and making the coffee slosh dangerously close to the rim. She bit her lip, tightened her grip and took a deep breath. Finally, she gathered her courage, stepped forward and said almost in a whisper, "Excuse me, could I say something real quick?" Leo turned, eyebrows raised, but his expression was patient. He closed his laptop and swiveled to face her fully. "Sure, what's up?" Julia swallowed hard, pointed shyly at the big screen. I think the word campaign might be missing a G in the title." A beat of silence fell between them. Julia could hear the frantic hammering of her own heartbeat. Leo frowned, looked at the screen, then gave a soft, rueful laugh. "Oh, you're right," he said, shaking his head. "Thanks for catching that. You probably just saved me from embarrassing myself in front of the whole department." Julia flushed, shifting. Awkwardly, "It's nothing," she murmured. "I just noticed it." He smiled at her, really smiled, his eyes bright with easy gratitude. "I need more people like you around, people who actually notice the details and aren't afraid to speak up." The words landed softly, but with a weight that Julia felt. Deep in her chest, she ducked her head, hiding her shy grin behind her coffee cup, and took a few quick steps back toward her desk. "I'll fix it right away," Leo added warmly. "Seriously, thank you." Julia gave a tiny nod, murmured, "You're welcome," and hurried back to her seat, her heart galloping. Settling into her chair, she opened her notebook. On a fresh page she wrote in small looping letters, "Today I was brave and I was rewarded with a smile. The boy at table 3, he wasn't just the first person to tell me, 'Be careful. It's raining.' He was the first to make me believe I might matter." That afternoon, as Julia reviewed a checklist for her team, a new email popped into her inbox. Sender, Leo Carter. Subject, "Thanks. The message was short and simple. Thanks. Again for saving me from a major facepalm moment, but guess. If you ever have time, I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on the presentation. Julia stared at the screen, hardly believing what she saw. An intern like her, invited to share feedback. Her chest tightened, full to the brim with something too tender for words. Not everyone in this office would have welcomed a correction, let alone encouraged more. That evening, on the bus ride home, Julia leaned her head against the window, watching the city lights stream past like scattered dreams. She pulled out her phone, snapped a screenshot of the email, and saved it into a special folder she had just created. A folder named The First Days. A clumsy correction, yet it opened a door she never could have imagined. In the days following that quiet correction, Julia found herself slipping into a new habit, scribbling down every small detail about Leo in the battered notebook she had carried since her university days. It was no longer just a place for to-do lists, dry meeting notes, or looming deadlines. Now, between the messy scrawl of tasks and reminders, tiny vignettes of memory began to bloom, small moments that seemed ordinary but somehow stayed with her, vivid and stubborn. One morning, while Julia struggled to download a heavy presentation, filed from the internal server, the company's Wi-Fi began to falter. Frustration burned hot in her chest, and she nearly slammed her palm against the desk. Just then, from the table nearby, Leo's voice floated over, low and knowing. "Server, acting up again?" Julia glanced up and found him frowning at his own screen. They exchanged a quick, wry look of solidarity. She laughed, a real laugh bubbling up through the strain for the first time in weeks. That night, in her notebook, she wrote, "He hates the glitchy server too. Maybe we're more alike than I thought." Another day at the printer, Julia wrestled with a jammed tray and a stack of documents stubbornly stuck inside. Leo approached, holding a large ream of paper. He didn't say much, just knelt down quietly to help. "Here, just pull gently at this corner," he said calmly, showing her how to free the trapped sheets. There was no irritation in his voice, no impatience at the delay. It was a small gesture, but the simple patience of it warmed something deep inside Julia. In her notebook, she added, "He's never in a rush, never harsh, never careless. I've never met anyone so busy and yet so kind." Gradually, little sketches began to appear in the margins. Another habit Julia hadn't indulged in since high school. With a simple blue pen, she drew him bent over his laptop, or sipping coffee by the window, or just the scuffed toes of his sneakers peeking out beneath a desk. Each stroke was a way to trap the fleeting, precious instants she didn't know how else to hold on to. One afternoon, waiting for the kettle to boil in the pantry, Julia caught sight of Leo again, standing quietly with a cup of peppermint tea, his gaze distant, fixed on the glittering city beyond the glass. Something about the scene, the stillness, the rare calm amidst the chaos, imprinted itself so deeply on her that she dedicated an entire page that evening to sketch it. At the bottom of the page, she wrote, "The only person who makes me forget I'm alone." Day by day, Leo's presence became less a part of the noisy office background and more like a secret anchor in Julia's quiet, private world. Just catching sight of him, just one brief meeting of eyes, was enough to give her reason to push through another day. And yet Julia never crossed the delicate, invisible line she had drawn around them. She never dared get closer. She was afraid to break whatever fragile, beautiful thing existed between them, afraid to stain it with too much hope. Sometimes, when she saw Leo laughing easily with other co-workers, his smile as gentle as ever, Julia felt a quiet ache inside her chest. She reminded herself over and over, don't dream, don't expect anything more, just to see him each day, just to hear the occasional soft hello. That, she told herself, was enough. That night, beneath the warm halo of her desk lamp, Julia opened her notebook and stared at a blank page, her heart a tangled mess of longing and gratitude. Finally, with a hand that trembled slightly, she wrote, "If I could only talk to him one more time, it would be enough." Outside her window, San Francisco glowed with 1,000 city lights like stars fallen to earth. And there she sat, tucked away in her tiny apartment, notebook in her lap, sheltering every fragile, unspoken thing she had never dared to say aloud. In her own private world, Julia wrote about the boy who had brought light to her grayest days. On Friday, the office seemed to move at a slower rhythm. People stacked papers, wrapped up weekly reports, and squeezed in last-minute meetings for the week ahead. The air was lighter than usual, punctuated now and then by bursts of laughter. Hidden among the steady clatter of keyboards, Julia had just completed her first full data analysis report for the junior marketing team. She exhaled a long, shaky breath, saved the file and checked it meticulously one last time before sending it off. Her thin fingers trembled, not from cold, but from fear. Being an intern here felt like walking a tightrope stretched between two skyscrapers with no safety net below. She was about to reward herself with a warm cup of tea when the desk phone buzzed softly. Startled, Julia stared at the blinking extension number. It was from the 12th floor, the floor reserved for senior executives and the CEO. Her heart leapt into her throat. Tentatively, she picked up the receiver. "Hello, this is Julia from Junior Marketing," she said in a small voice. On the other end, a calm, deep woman's voice answered, "Hello, Julia. I'm calling from the project office on the 12th floor. The marketing director would like to see you for a quick meeting. Could you come up now?" For a moment, Julia was too stunned to breathe. Yes, of course," she stammered. When she set the phone down, her hands were ice cold. Every cell in her body screamed, "What did I do wrong?" Had there been an error in the file she sent that morning? Had she accidentally printed the wrong draft yesterday? Had someone complained about her awkwardness, her silence, her invisibility? Around her, the office buzzed on, no one noticing her turmoil. The loneliness tightened around her throat like a noose. She rose, smoothing down her blouse, and hurried toward the hallway. One hand clutched the strap of her crossbody bag, as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. At the far end, the elevator glowed, its needles slowly ticking upward toward her floor. Each step toward it felt unbearably heavy. Julia breathed deeply, trying to steady herself, but her hand still shook as it hovered over the elevator button. When the doors slid open, she stepped inside, alone. The mirrored walls reflected back a small, pale-faced girl who barely recognized herself. She pressed the button for the 12th floor. With a soft chime, the elevator lurched upward, carrying her higher and higher. She stared at the numbers blinking. 6, 7, 8. Her heart hammered violently. She repeated to herself, like a prayer, "Stay calm. Own your mistakes. Accept the consequences." When the elevator stopped at the 12th floor, the doors opened onto a hushed, carpeted hallway lit by warm golden lights that gleamed against the glass walls. It was nothing like the noisy lower floors. Here, the air was reverent still. Julia stepped out, her footsteps muffled against the thick carpet. A receptionist, seated at a small, elegant desk, smiled warmly. "Hi, you must be Julia. Go ahead, first meeting room on your right. Someone's waiting for you." "Thank you," Julia whispered, her mouth dry. She walked slowly, palms damp, every step measured and uncertain. The meeting room door was slightly ajar, a warm strip of light spilling out onto the hallway carpet. Julia froze at the threshold, her hand clenched into a fist, knuckles whitening. In that single, endless moment, she thought of every misstep she had made since stepping into this. Company, slow email replies, small numerical errors, missed meetings she had tried so hard to blend into. If this was it, she thought, if this was the end. The idea sent a shudder through her. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply. "Be brave," she told herself. Her hand, trembling but determined, reached for the door handle. She grasped it tightly, turned it, and pushed the door open. Julia's heart raced wildly in her chest. She was about to face a truth she hadn't dared imagine. The door swung open with a soft whisper, revealing a spacious yet warmly lit conference room. Gentle light from the recessed ceiling fixtures bathed the space, giving it an air of quiet formality without feeling cold. Julia stepped in, clutching the strap of her bag. She drew a shaky breath, willing herself to stay composed. Then she froze. Standing in the center of the room, hands casually tucked into his pockets, waiting with a calm, steady gaze, was Leo. The boy from table 3. The one who had shared a seat in the pantry. The one who had listened patiently when she nervously pointed out a typo. The one who had smiled at her during all those silent lunches. Now, in a sharp navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and an easy confidence that suddenly seemed achingly familiar, Leo Carter, the brilliant young CEO of one of the city's top marketing firms, stood there, quietly watching her. Julia went utterly still. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The air between them seemed to crystallize, thick and brittle, all sound blurred into the frantic drumbeat of her own heart. Her mouth opened, but for a moment, no sound emerged. Finally, her voice broke free, small and trembling. You're the boss?" Leo's expression softened, a flicker of something almost sheepish crossing his features. He nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." Julia stood rooted to the floor, her cheeks flaming. All those lunches, the small kindnesses, the typo she had corrected without a second thought, they played back through her mind in slow motion, each one shimmering with a brand new meaning. Leo took a small step closer, his voice gentle. "I know this must be confusing, but if I'd introduced myself as the CEO, would you have still felt comfortable correcting me?" Julia opened her mouth to answer, then shut it again. She didn't know what to say. He went on, his tone earnest. "I didn't want anyone treating me differently because of my title. I wanted to see what the company culture was really like. I wanted to find people like you, people who notice the small things, people who aren't afraid to speak up." Beyond the glass walls, the late afternoon sunlight spilled in, painting soft golden streaks across the grey carpet. The room fell into a quiet, heavy stillness, but it no longer felt suffocating. Julia dropped her gaze, feeling the rush of conflicting emotions. Humiliation, confusion, warmth. Leo took a half step back, giving her space. "I'm sorry if it feels like I tricked you," he said, his voice low, "but I wanted to ask if you'd consider joining a new project, something special." Julia looked up, wide-eyed. He smiled, an open, hopeful smile she recognized, not from a CEO, but from the boy who had once offered her a spare charger without a second thought. "We're rebuilding the company culture, from the smallest things outward, and I think you could help us do that." She stood there, hands still clutching the worn strap of her bag, her heart spinning in every direction. Doubt, joy, fear, disbelief. But deep within her, a quiet voice stirred. "Believe? This is the chance you've been waiting for." Leo watched her patiently, not pushing, not pressing, just waiting as he always had, with that same quiet kindness. Julia breathed. In slowly, deeply, she knew instinctively that this was no longer just about a quiet boy at a table in the pantry. This was a turning point, a door opening, if she could only summon the courage to walk through it. The truth hadn't only shaken Julia's world. It had opened the first page of a brand new chapter of her life. The conference room on the 12th floor was wrapped in warm golden light, the noise of the outside world muted behind thick panes of glass. Julia stood there, heart pounding, feeling as if the entire world had narrowed down to just the two of them, her and Leo. She clutched the strap of her bag tighter, Leo's words still echoing in her mind. "I want you to be part of rebuilding our company culture." She hesitated, emotions swirling wildly inside her. Surprise, happiness, fear, and a deep, almost painful shyness, knowing how many secret pages she had written about him. But Leo's gaze, even here, even now, was the same as it had always been at table 3. Calm, kind, and utterly without pressure. On an impulse, perhaps a reckless leap of the heart, Julia quietly unzipped her worn leather bag and pulled out her soft, fraying notebook. She walked toward the conference table where Leo waited, and without a word offered the journal to him. Leo accepted it, a flicker of surprise passing over his face. He turned the cover carefully, flipping through a few pages. He stopped midway, his eyes pausing, softening. There, sketched in delicate strokes of blue ink, were quiet pieces of her world, snippets of their brief conversations. Tiny moments, fleeting but captured with careful, loving detail, simple sketches tucked between her words, of a boy hunched over a laptop in the pantry, of a figure standing by the window bathed in afternoon light, of scuffed sneakers poking out from beneath a desk. Not professional drawings, but honest ones, each line tender, each one alive with quiet feeling. Leo pressed his lips together, then slowly looked up at her, his eyes shining with something raw and unmistakably real. "You drew all this?" he asked, voice low. Julia nodded, face flaming. She stammered, eyes dropping to the carpet. "I just wanted to remember the things that made me feel less alone." Leo smiled then, not the polished smile of a CEO, but something softer, more fragile. A smile that said he saw her, really saw her. He turned a few more pages, then gently closed the notebook and handed it back to her, as if it was something precious. "I never realized," he said, his voice steady, "how much someone could see just by quietly being there." Julia clutched the journal to her chest, hands trembling. "That's exactly why," Leo continued, stepping forward, his gaze unwavering. "I believe you're perfect for this project." She looked up, wide-eyed, unsure if she had heard him right. "Culture," Leo said, "isn't built through speeches or mission statements. It's built in the little things, in how we treat each other, in the quiet ways we show we care, and you've been seeing those things all along." He moved closer, closing the distance to just a single step between them. "We want to create a place where every person, no matter how small they think they are, feels like they matter. And I need people who can see that, people like you." Julia felt her throat tighten, a painful, beautiful swell of emotion rising inside her. Part of her still quivered with fear. After all, she was just an ordinary girl, an intern fumbling through spreadsheets and deadlines. But another part, a braver, deeper part, whispered, "You have something real to give, trust it." She gripped her notebook a little tighter, drew in a shaky breath. I'd love to," she whispered. Leo's smile widened, glowing but still gentle. "Welcome," he said simply. And to Julia, those few words meant everything. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, not for what she had accomplished, not for how loud she could be, but for the quiet, earnest heart she had always hidden away. Julia understood then. When you lead with sincerity, there is nowhere you cannot go. Every beautiful journey begins with the most trembling steps. Julia sat once again at the familiar open workspace on the 5th floor, a paper cup of coffee cradled in her hands, her eyes still lit with a brilliance she couldn't hide. She had just returned from the 12th floor, where she had accepted Leo Carter's invitation to join the new cultural project team. It all felt like a dream, but the steady drum of her heartbeat confirmed it was real. Her hands still trembled, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from an exhilarating, soaring joy she had never known before. At their usual table near the pantry, she wasn't alone. Leo sat across from her, elbow on the table, chin propped in his hand, studying the mobile whiteboard they had dragged out of the supply closet. Across the board, messy bullet points sprawled. Respect at every level. Celebrate small victories, real listening, real growth. Julia carefully copied every idea into her brand new notebook, the one she had been given that morning. Embossed with the team's name, Culture Revive Project, Leo raised an eyebrow, eyeing the list. "I like real listening," he said, tapping the words lightly with his finger. "It sounds simple, but it's powerful." Julia smiled, her whole face alight, because most people only listen to reply, not to understand. Leo nodded, resting his chin back in his palm. "Exactly. And that's the first thing we have to change. The distance between them now wasn't the gulf between a timid intern and an untouchable CEO. It was simply the space between two people sharing the same dream, to build a place where everyone felt they belonged. That afternoon, sunlight poured in through the wide windows, casting a warm, golden haze across the common desks. The room around them hummed with the usual buzz of emails, meetings and deadlines, but at their little table, a small, quiet world had formed, a world stitched together by words and ideas and a growing, steadfast trust. Julia and Leo talked about everything, about their shaky first jobs, about mistakes that had once felt like the end of the world, about the small kindnesses from strangers that had once saved their days. Julia laughed when Leo confessed he'd once been politely kicked out of a meeting for dressing too casually, jeans, sneakers, and no name tag. "And you still smiled." "Afterward," she teased. Leo winked. "Sometimes," he said, "what you wear doesn't define what you're capable of bringing to the table." The words hit Julia like a bright, steady drumbeat inside her chest, and she realized then what set Leo apart wasn't his title or his tailored suit. It was the way he met the world, with a humility and sincerity that needed no announcement. When they paused for a short break, Leo stood and stretched, then pointed back at the whiteboard. "You know," he said, "everything you wrote down today, if we live it, it won't just change this company. It'll change people's lives." Julia looked up at her own shaky handwriting, and for the first time in her life, she believed that even her small words could matter. A tiny dream, an ordinary heart. But when joined with trust and kindness, they could light even the darkest corners. The afternoon slid gently toward evening, as Julia stood in front of the whiteboard, looking. At the little world they were beginning to build, she smiled to herself. This wasn't just the start of a new project, it was the start of her own journey, a journey no longer built on fear, but on belief. Beyond the glass, the last golden light of the day spilled across San Francisco, turning the city into a glowing sea of honey, and in that quiet moment Julia knew she had finally stepped out of her cocoon. The world, vast, daunting, breathtaking, was waiting for her. Some treasures can only be found when you're brave, enough to leave the safety of fear behind. Sometimes it's the simplest moments and the quietest sincerity that hold the power to change a life forever. Believe in your own worth, no matter who you are, because genuine kindness always finds a way to reach across any distance and touch the heart. Thank you for walking this emotional journey with us. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel to help us spread even more human stories filled with warmth and inspiration. See you again on the next journey.